Here is the completed story intro following your requested structure. Edit, follow my rules, or leave, the CEO said. The single dad walked away with her entire team. Why would a single dad choose to walk away after hearing those words? And what could make an entire team leave with him? Hi everyone, and welcome back to the channel. If you enjoy powerful stories about courage, integrity, and unexpected turning points, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. Thank you for being here and for supporting this channel with your time, your comments, and your encouragement. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, what would you do if your boss gave you that kind of ultimatum? Now, let's go back to the moment when a single sentence changed everything, and a routine meeting became the beginning of a story no one in that room could have predicted. If you think loyalty can be replaced with authority, you're about to learn the most expensive lesson of your career. The conference room fell silent the moment Charlotte Hayes set her tablet on the polished table and looked around at the senior leadership team. She had been CEO for less than 3 weeks, yet every meeting felt like a battlefield she intended to win. "I'm done with the old way of doing things," she said. "From today on, everyone follows my rules. If you can't, the door is right there." A few people shifted in their chairs. Others stared at their laptops, pretending to review notes that no longer mattered. Ethan Brooks didn't react. He simply closed his notebook with quiet care, as if he had already made peace with whatever came next. Charlotte noticed the movement and locked eyes with him. "Is there something you'd like to say?" she asked. Ethan met her gaze without anger or fear. "No," he answered. "You've made your expectations clear." His calm voice somehow made the room even quieter. Charlotte folded her arms. "Good. Then we're all on the same page." Ethan nodded once. "No," he said softly. "We're just looking at different pages." A few heads lifted. Someone near the window looked down to hide a smile. Charlotte's expression hardened. "Then maybe this company isn't the place for you anymore." Ethan reached for the strap of his worn backpack, the same one he carried every day instead of an expensive leather briefcase. He stood without rushing, slid his notebook inside, and glanced briefly toward the engineers sitting along the far wall. "I hope everything works out," he said. There was no sarcasm in his voice, no bitterness, just sincerity that somehow felt heavier than an argument. He walked toward the conference room door. No one stopped him. The soft click of the handle echoed louder than anyone expected. Charlotte exhaled slowly. "Anyone else?" she asked. Nobody answered. At least, not with words. Ethan was already halfway down the hallway when he heard another door open behind him. Then another. Then another. He didn't turn around. Inside the conference room, Charlotte frowned as one senior engineer quietly closed his laptop. A second stood up and picked up her coffee mug. Marcus Reed, the COO, remained seated for a long second before looking directly at Charlotte. "Meetings end," he said calmly. "Leadership doesn't." Then he stood. Charlotte watched him walk away, unable to understand why the room suddenly felt so much larger than it had 5 minutes earlier. She still believed she had lost one employee. Within the next few minutes, she was about to discover that something far more valuable had just walked out the door. The elevator doors closed with a soft chime, leaving Ethan alone with his reflection. He loosened his tie, let out a slow breath, and pressed the lobby button. His phone buzzed once. Then again. He glanced at the screen without stopping the elevator. 3 messages from different engineers. None of them asked where he was going. Every one of them asked the same question in different words. "Are you still meeting us?" Ethan slipped the phone back into his pocket. "We will talk later," he whispered to himself. Outside, the afternoon sun reflected off the glass towers downtown as employees hurried through the sidewalks carrying coffee cups and laptop bags. Ethan crossed the street at an unhurried pace, unlocked his 10-year-old sedan, and drove across the city. The traffic was heavy, but he did not seem bothered. He reached an elementary school just before dismissal. Children poured through the front doors laughing and calling to their parents. A little girl with a blue backpack spotted him immediately. "Dad!" Lily shouted as she ran toward him. Ethan smiled, the first genuine smile he had worn all day. "Hey, Peanut." She wrapped her arms around him. "You are early. I promised I would be." She tilted her head. "Did your meeting finish already?" Ethan paused for a fraction of a second before answering. "It finished." Lily studied his face for a moment. "Everything okay?" He opened the passenger door for her. "Everything that matters is sitting in this car." She grinned. That means pizza tonight. He laughed softly. That sounds like a pretty good idea. They stopped at a neighborhood pizza place where the owner greeted them by name. The usual, he asked. Ethan nodded. Please. Lily colored on the paper placemat, while Ethan quietly checked his phone. The messages had multiplied. Marcus had written only one sentence. Call me when you can. Ethan locked the screen without replying. Lily noticed. Work again. Work can wait. She smiled and pushed her drawing across the table. It showed the two of them standing beside a house with a huge tree. Ethan looked at it carefully. You made the tree taller. Because you always say strong roots matter more than tall branches. Ethan stared at the drawing a little longer than she realized. I guess I do. Across town, Charlotte stood in the executive conference room staring at nearly a dozen empty chairs. Emily Foster, the human resources director, stepped inside carrying a folder. I have an update, she said carefully. Charlotte looked up. Tell me they came back. Emily hesitated. They cleaned out their desks. Charlotte frowned. All of them. Emily nodded once. Every senior architect who reported directly to Ethan submitted a resignation within the last hour. Charlotte laughed quietly, convinced it had to be a bluff. People do not walk away from careers because one employee leaves. Emily lowered the folder onto the table, but did not open it. I do not think they walked away because he left. Charlotte's confidence wavered for the first time that day. Then Emily quietly added one more sentence that made the room feel colder than the air conditioning ever could. I do not think Ethan was the one following this company. I think this company has been following Ethan all along. Charlotte remained standing in the empty conference room long after Emily left. She looked at the vacant chairs again, expecting someone to walk back in and tell her the resignations had been a misunderstanding. Instead, her phone rang. It was the vice president of operations. Charlotte, we have a problem. I already know about the resignations. It is bigger than that. She straightened. How much bigger? The Phoenix rollout just stopped. Charlotte frowned. Restart it. We cannot. Why not? There was a brief silence before the answer came. Nobody else understands the architecture well enough. Charlotte ended the call and walked quickly toward the engineering floor. The office that had been buzzing with conversation that morning now felt strangely quiet. Several desks were already empty. Family photos were gone. Coffee mugs had disappeared. A small potted cactus sat alone on one desk beside an unplugged monitor. Charlotte stopped at Ethan's former workstation. It was remarkably ordinary. No awards covered the walls. No expensive gadgets filled the shelves. There was only a neatly organized keyboard, an empty docking station, and a framed picture of Lily smiling with missing front teeth at what looked like a county fair. Charlotte picked up the frame for a second before carefully placing it back exactly where it had been. Marcus walked onto the floor carrying a cardboard box. Looking for something? He asked. I am looking for answers, Charlotte replied. Marcus nodded toward Ethan's desk. You are standing in front of most of them. Charlotte folded her arms. Everyone keeps acting as if he was irreplaceable. Marcus gave a tired smile. Nobody is irreplaceable. Then why is everything falling apart? Marcus looked across the nearly empty office. Because replacing knowledge is easy. Replacing trust is not. Before Charlotte could respond, another manager hurried toward them holding a tablet. The client from Seattle is asking for Ethan. Charlotte answered immediately. Tell them he no longer works here. The manager hesitated. They specifically requested him. They said he promised to review the final deployment personally. Charlotte extended her hand. Give me the meeting. Less than 15 minutes later, she appeared on the video call. The client's project director smiled politely at first. Then his expression changed. Where is Ethan? Charlotte kept her voice professional. He has decided to move on, but I will be overseeing the project. The director exchanged a glance with someone off camera. With respect, our agreement was based on Ethan's involvement. He has been advising us for almost 2 years. Charlotte blinked. That detail had never appeared in the executive briefing she received after becoming chief executive. I assure you our company has many talented people. The director nodded slowly. I hope that is true, because Ethan always said great systems depend on great teams. The screen went dark after the meeting ended. Charlotte stared at her own reflection for a moment. It was the second time that day someone had repeated Ethan's philosophy instead of praising his technical skills. She began wondering whether she had misunderstood not only the man, but the entire company. Then her assistant knocked lightly on the open door. Charlotte, There is one more thing you should probably see. She handed over a confidential folder marked with Ethan's name. Charlotte opened it, expecting a routine employee file. The first page made her stop breathing for just a moment because it listed a responsibility she had never imagined he had quietly carried for years. Charlotte lowered herself into her chair without taking her eyes off the file. The first page identified Ethan Brooks as the original lead architect of the company's entire cloud platform. The second page listed patents that carried his name alongside the company's. The third contained handwritten notes from previous executives praising his ability to solve problems no one else could untangle. She flipped another page. It documented 3 promotions he had declined over the past 6 years. Each time he had written the same reason in the comment section. Current schedule allows me to be present for my daughter. Charlotte leaned back slowly. Why was none of this mentioned during the leadership transition? Emily stood quietly across the office. Because Ethan never talked about himself. And nobody else thought they needed to. Charlotte closed the folder, but kept one finger resting on the cover. That does not explain why half the engineering department followed him. Emily hesitated before answering. You have been asking the wrong question. Charlotte looked up. Then give me the right one. Emily spoke carefully. Do not ask why they left with Ethan. Ask why they trusted him more than the company. Before Charlotte could respond, another notification appeared on her computer. 2 more senior developers had submitted resignations. She rubbed her forehead and walked back onto the engineering floor. The silence felt different now. Earlier it had sounded like confidence. Now it sounded like absence. She stopped beside a whiteboard covered with diagrams that only hours earlier had been part of an active discussion. Someone had erased most of it, but one sentence remained in the corner. Build systems that people can trust. Charlotte stared at the words. He wrote that, Marcus said as he approached. He never erased it because every new engineer eventually asked what it meant. Charlotte folded her arms. What was his answer? Marcus smiled faintly. He always said the same thing. If people cannot trust each other, they will never trust the software they build together. Charlotte looked around the nearly empty room. For the first time since becoming chief executive, she wondered if she had mistaken authority for leadership. Her phone rang again. This time it was the chairman of the board. Charlotte, investors have heard about the resignations. We are managing the situation. Are you? He asked calmly. Because they want an emergency briefing tomorrow morning. After the call ended, Charlotte remained still for several seconds. The pressure was no longer limited to one department. It had reached the highest level of the company. Across town, Ethan sat at the kitchen table helping Lily with her math homework. 7 times 8? He asked with a smile. Lily tapped her pencil against the workbook. 56. Exactly. She looked up at him. You seem happier now. Ethan laughed softly. Do I? You always smile like that when you finally stop worrying about something. He paused, surprised by how closely she noticed him. Sometimes letting go is harder than holding on, he said. Lily nodded as though it made perfect sense. Grandma used to say that. Ethan glanced toward the family photograph on the refrigerator before quietly returning to the homework. His phone lit up once more. This time there was only one message. It came from a number he did not recognize. It contained just 6 words. We need to talk. Tomorrow morning. Charlotte Hayes. The next morning arrived with gray clouds hanging over the city, matching the mood inside the company's headquarters. Charlotte stood at the large conference room window before the emergency board meeting, holding Ethan's employee file in one hand and a cup of untouched coffee in the other. She had barely slept. Every page she had read the night before had raised another question instead of providing an answer. The board members filed into the room one by one. Their greetings were brief. Their expressions were not encouraging. The chairman opened the meeting without wasting time. Tell us exactly where we stand. Charlotte inhaled slowly. We lost 9 senior engineers yesterday. The room remained silent. The Phoenix project has stopped, and 2 clients have requested meetings regarding leadership continuity. One board member leaned forward. Can you recover? Charlotte wanted to answer with confidence, but the truth refused to cooperate. Yes, she said after a pause. It will take time. The chairman folded his hands. Time is exactly what investors believe we do not have. The meeting ended with more questions than solutions. As the directors walked out, the chairman remained behind. Charlotte, she looked up. You were hired because you know how to build companies. He glanced toward the empty hallway. Do not forget that companies are built by people first. His words stayed with her long after he left. Across town, Ethan finished walking Lily to her classroom. She hugged him before running toward the entrance, then suddenly turned around. Dad, yes. You always tell me to be kind, even when it is hard. Ethan smiled. I do. She waved. Do not forget today. He watched her disappear through the school doors before quietly returning to his car. His phone buzzed again. It was the same unfamiliar number. Another message appeared. Please give me 15 minutes. No lawyers. No board members. Just a conversation. Ethan stared at the screen before placing the phone face down on the passenger seat. Meanwhile, Charlotte stood outside a small neighborhood coffee shop a few blocks from Lily's school. She had chosen the location after discovering from human resources that Ethan came there almost every Friday morning. She checked her watch. For the first time in years, she felt nervous about meeting an employee. A few minutes later, Ethan walked across the parking lot carrying nothing except his backpack. He noticed her immediately, but did not change direction. Charlotte stepped forward. Thank you for coming. Ethan looked at her calmly. I never said I was here to meet you. She managed a faint smile. Fair enough. They stood in silence for a moment before she spoke again. I read your file. Ethan's expression did not change. Files usually tell you what someone did. Charlotte nodded slowly. Not who they are. He opened the coffee shop door and held it for an elderly couple walking out. They thanked him, and he wished them a good morning before looking back at Charlotte. What is it you really want to ask? She met his eyes, searching for an answer that had escaped her for days. Why did they trust you enough to leave everything behind? Ethan looked through the front window where customers chatted over breakfast without noticing either of them. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost gentle. That is not the question you should be asking. Charlotte felt her heartbeat quicken because she suddenly realized there might be an answer she was not ready to hear. Charlotte held Ethan's gaze, waiting for him to continue. He looked toward the street where parents were dropping off their children before work. People do not leave because of one meeting, he said quietly. They leave because of what they have been feeling for a long time. Charlotte remained silent. Yesterday was only the moment they finally made a decision. She lowered her eyes for a second. You are saying this started before I arrived. Ethan nodded. Pressure is not always the problem. Sometimes people simply stop believing they matter. The words landed harder than any accusation. Charlotte started to respond, then stopped herself. For the first time since becoming chief executive, she realized she was listening instead of preparing an argument. Her phone vibrated. She ignored it. It vibrated again. Ethan glanced at the screen. You should probably answer. Charlotte stepped aside and accepted the call. Marcus did not waste a second. The Phoenix client suspended deployment. Charlotte closed her eyes. Completely. Until they understand who will be leading the technical strategy. She thanked him and ended the call. When she turned back, Ethan was watching the morning traffic. You already knew that would happen, did not you? She asked. He shook his head. I hoped it would not. They walked into the coffee shop and ordered separately. Ethan chose plain black coffee. Charlotte asked for a latte, but barely touched it after it arrived. They sat near the window where the conversation could continue without interruption. Why did you refuse those promotions? Charlotte finally asked. Ethan smiled faintly. Because promotions usually came with longer hours. Most people would have accepted them anyway. Most people were not trying to get home before a third grader finished her homework. Charlotte looked down at the foam in her cup. Your file only mentioned your daughter. Ethan reached into his backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was the drawing Lily had made the night before. The tree stood in the middle with two small figures beneath it. Charlotte studied the picture. She drew this. Every Friday, she leaves me a new one. Ethan carefully folded it again. Children remember who was there. They rarely remember who had the biggest title. Charlotte looked away toward the sidewalk outside. She suddenly remembered the 3 promotions Ethan had declined. At the time, the previous leadership had probably seen a man lacking ambition. Now she wondered if they had actually been looking at someone who understood success differently. Before either of them spoke again, Charlotte's phone buzzed for the 3rd time. This message came from the chairman. There was no greeting. Only one sentence. An investor discovered Ethan has left the company and wants an emergency call within 1 hour. Charlotte slowly placed the phone on the table. This keeps getting worse. Ethan answered gently. Only because you are finally seeing how much was hidden beneath the surface. Charlotte looked at him carefully. Would you come back if I asked? Ethan did not answer immediately. Instead, He watched a father help his young son tie a loose shoelace outside the cafe. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. "You are still asking the wrong question." Charlotte felt a quiet frustration rise inside her. "Then tell me the right one." Ethan stood, picked up his coffee, and adjusted the strap of his backpack. "The real question is why so many good people believe they had to choose between doing great work and being treated with respect." He walked toward the door without another word. Charlotte remained seated, staring at the untouched latte in front of her. For the first time, she was no longer trying to bring one employee back. She was beginning to understand that rebuilding an entire culture might be the only way to save the company. Charlotte returned to headquarters carrying far more than Ethan's words. The lobby looked exactly as it had every other morning, but she noticed details she had ignored before. Employees avoided eye contact. Conversations stopped when executives walked past. The building was full, yet it felt strangely empty. She stepped into the executive conference room where Marcus and Emily were already waiting. "I met with Ethan," Charlotte said. Marcus nodded as though he had expected it. Emily simply asked, "Did he agree to come back?" Charlotte slowly shook her head. "He never even discussed returning." Marcus folded his hands. "That sounds like him." Charlotte looked at both of them. "I finally understand something." Neither interrupted. "This company does not have a staffing problem. It has a trust problem." The room fell silent. Emily was the first to speak. "That is the first accurate diagnosis we have heard all week." Charlotte sat down and opened her notebook. "Tell me everything I do not know." Marcus exchanged a glance with Emily before answering. "You inherited a company that grew faster than its culture. Targets increased. Meetings multiplied. People stopped feeling heard." Emily continued gently. "Whenever someone struggled, Ethan was usually the first person to notice. He mentored new engineers after hours without asking for recognition. He covered projects so parents could attend school events. He quietly paid for professional certifications when junior employees could not afford them." Charlotte stared at them. None of those actions appeared anywhere inside Ethan's performance reviews. Why was none of this documented? Emily smiled sadly. "Because kindness rarely appears on quarterly reports." Before Charlotte could reply, her assistant entered carrying a folder marked Investor Relations. "The investors are ready for the emergency call." Minutes later, Charlotte faced a screen filled with concerned shareholders. One of them spoke immediately. "We have one question. Can the company retain its top talent?" Charlotte thought about offering polished corporate language. Instead, she answered honestly, "Not unless we become the kind of company worth staying with." Several faces on the screen changed. It was not the answer they expected, but it was the truth. After the meeting ended, Marcus looked at her with quiet surprise. "That was different." Charlotte nodded. "I have spent years measuring performance. I forgot to measure respect." That afternoon, word spread that Charlotte had canceled every executive strategy session for the rest of the week. Instead, she scheduled open listening meetings with every department. Many employees arrived expecting another presentation. There were no slides, no speeches. Charlotte stood at the front of the room with only a notebook. "Today," she began, "I am not asking you to impress me. I am asking you to tell me what we stopped seeing." At first, nobody spoke. Then one engineer slowly stood. Another followed. Soon stories filled the room. They spoke about missed family dinners, unanswered concerns, impossible deadlines, and the quiet encouragement Ethan had offered when nobody else noticed. Charlotte wrote every sentence without interruption. As the meeting ended, Marcus quietly approached her. "Do you think this will be enough?" Charlotte closed her notebook and looked across the room where employees were talking openly for the first time in months. "No," she admitted. "This is only the beginning." At that exact moment, her assistant hurried toward her with unexpected excitement. "Charlotte, you need to see this." She handed over a report showing that every engineer who had resigned had accepted the same destination. None had joined a competitor. None had started retirement. They had all accepted positions at a brand new company that had officially been incorporated only that morning, and the name listed as its founder made Charlotte stop in disbelief. Charlotte read the report twice before looking up. The founder's name was Ethan Brooks. She did not feel anger. She felt understanding. The engineers had not followed him because he offered higher salaries or impressive titles. They had followed the person they trusted. Marcus studied the report beside her. "He actually did it," he said quietly. Emily smiled with genuine admiration. He finally built the company people kept asking him to create. Charlotte closed the folder and walked to the window overlooking the city skyline. Somewhere beyond those buildings, Ethan was beginning again. She remembered the first words she had spoken to him. Follow my rules or leave. At the time she believed she had defended discipline. Now she realized she had challenged the one person holding the culture together. Across town, Ethan unlocked the door to a modest office suite that still smelled of fresh paint. There were no expensive decorations. Folding tables served as temporary desks. Cardboard boxes lined the walls. One by one, familiar faces entered carrying laptops, notebooks, and coffee cups. Nobody applauded. Nobody celebrated. They simply smiled because they were exactly where they wanted to be. Ethan looked around the room. Thank you for believing in this. One engineer laughed. You believed first. Another added, you never asked us to leave. You only asked us one question. Ethan nodded. I remember. The engineer smiled. You asked where we could do our best work without forgetting who we are. The room became quietly thoughtful. Ethan placed a notebook on the nearest table. Then let us build that place together. During the afternoon, they discussed values before products, mentorship before metrics, and sustainable schedules before impossible deadlines. Every decision began with the same question. Does this help people do great work without sacrificing the people they love? Nobody argued against it. Late that afternoon, Ethan received an unexpected visitor. Marcus stood outside the office carrying nothing except a paper bag from the neighborhood bakery. Ethan opened the door with a surprised smile. I was wondering how long it would take you. Marcus handed him the bag. Blueberry muffins. Your favorite. Ethan laughed softly. You remembered. Marcus looked around the unfinished office. This is smaller than I expected. For now, Ethan answered. Marcus nodded toward the engineers working together across the room. It already feels bigger than our headquarters. They sat near the front window while sunlight stretched across the floor. Marcus finally spoke. Charlotte is changing things. Ethan listened without interrupting. She canceled executive meetings. She is listening instead of talking. People noticed. Ethan smiled gently. That is a good start. Marcus leaned forward. She also knows she was wrong. Ethan looked outside where parents were walking children home from school. Knowing is different from changing. Marcus accepted the point with a quiet nod. Before leaving, he placed a sealed envelope on the table. She asked me to deliver this personally. After Marcus walked away, Ethan opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter, not a legal document, not a contract, and not a financial offer. It contained only a sincere apology, an acknowledgement of every mistake Charlotte believed she had made, and one final sentence written alone at the bottom of the page. If rebuilding trust is still possible, I would like to earn it instead of asking for it. Ethan read Charlotte's letter twice before carefully folding it and placing it back inside the envelope. He did not answer immediately because he believed sincere words deserved thoughtful responses. He placed the envelope inside his backpack and returned to the conference table where his new team was discussing the first product roadmap. Nobody asked about the letter. Nobody needed to. They trusted that Ethan would respond when the time was right. Over the following weeks, the small office slowly transformed into a thriving workplace. Whiteboards filled with ideas instead of pressure. Flexible schedules replaced endless late nights. Parents attended school plays without guilt. Junior engineers asked questions without fear of embarrassment. Every Friday afternoon, Ethan left exactly on time to pick up Lily from school. No meeting was ever considered more important than that promise. Across the city, Charlotte kept her own promise as well. She visited every department without an entourage. She removed policies that rewarded exhaustion instead of excellence. She invited employees to help rewrite the company's leadership principles. Some people remained skeptical. Others quietly decided to stay a little longer before resigning. Trust returned slowly because trust always returned one decision at a time. 3 months later, the annual Technology Leadership Summit brought together executives, investors, engineers, and entrepreneurs from across the country. Charlotte was scheduled to speak about rebuilding organizational culture. Ethan had been invited to participate in a panel discussing sustainable innovation. Neither knew the other would be attending until they arrived backstage. Charlotte walked toward him with calm determination. Thank you for reading my letter, she said. Ethan smiled politely. Thank you for writing it. She nodded. I did not expect forgiveness. Forgiveness and trust are different things. Ethan replied gently. One can be given quickly, the other must be earned. Charlotte accepted his answer without argument. I am still earning it. Moments later, they walked onto the stage from opposite sides. During the question and answer session, an audience member stood and asked the question everyone had been wondering. If you had the chance to go back to that first meeting, what would you do differently? Charlotte did not hesitate. I would ask one question before giving one order. I would try to understand the person before judging the employee. The audience applauded softly. Then the moderator turned to Ethan. Would you ever return? Ethan looked toward the crowd before answering. Sometimes the best way to honor the past is not to return to it. Sometimes it is to build something better because of it. The room fell completely silent. There was no dramatic celebration, no defeated enemy, no perfect ending. There was only a shared understanding that leadership was never about making people obey. It was about creating a place where people chose to give their very best. After the event ended, Ethan walked outside where Lily was waiting beside the sidewalk with a small bouquet of wildflowers she had picked with her grandmother that morning. How did it go, Dad? She asked. Ethan took her hand and smiled with the same quiet warmth that had guided every decision he had ever made. Better than I expected. Lily looked up. Did you win? Ethan glanced back at the conference center before looking at his daughter. The moment I never had to choose between my work and being your father, I already had. They walked toward the parking lot together as the evening sun settled behind the city skyline, leaving the noise of ambition behind them and carrying forward something far more lasting. The quiet dignity of a man who never needed the biggest office to become the leader everyone chose to follow.